Well, following the shooting in Orlando, many were left wondering if the attack could have been prevented.
A new CBS poll out today shows Americans are split, 42% saying that U.S. intelligence could have prevented the attack, and 42% saying no, it couldn't. Seamus Hughes, Deputy Director of the Program on Extremism at George Washington University, joins us now from Washington. Seamus, we know that the FBI confirmed that they knew about shooter Omar Mateen prior to the attack in Orlando, but is simply saying that U.S. intelligence could have prevented what could potentially be a lone wolf attack. Is that any easier said than done by telling them they could have gotten this guy?
It's very difficult to prevent these type of attacks. In fact, when we've looked at the past successful attacks, whether it's Boston Marathon bombing, the Fort Hood attack, any number of places, the FBI has always kind of had an open investigation on these individuals. The question becomes when the FBI can actually close a case, when they can bring legal charges against these individuals. It's very difficult when we live in a society that values the right of free speech.
So, Seamus, following the attack, ISIS said it was carried out by an Islamic State fighter, but there's no indication that the killer had operational support for them. He only appears to be a sympathizer. In fact, the FBI even just said at a recent press conference that they're looking at this as a hate crime in addition to an act of terror, which is different than being activated by a terrorist organization. So how is U.S. intelligence prepared to handle these kinds of attacks? Is it a question of cybersecurity?
It's a whole host of questions, but we've seen in the last 2 years, 88 individuals have been arrested for ISIS-related charges in the U.S. So it's an unprecedented number for the U.S. context. What we've also seen is there's mixed motivations. It's clear that this shooter had been flirting with the Islamist ideology for at least the last 3 years, but there's a whole host of factors to go into this. It doesn't really fit into one easy box. The other issue in terms of ISIS-directed versus ISIS-inspired, from ISIS's perspective, it doesn't really matter. They still take credit for the attack. They still are able to inspire other people to say, see what he did in Orlando, do what you can where you are.
When we talk about these militant groups abroad, oftentimes we talk about ISIS, but there are other groups. I was fascinated by something that caught my eye this morning, reading that the group Jabhat al-Nusra, which is a group, al-Qaeda affiliate group in Syria, claiming that this ISIS attack is not good, that having this lone wolf attack is not good for ISIS as a whole, calling it actually that ISIS is bleeding. Is it true? Do you feel that this is an indication that ISIS is not doing well?
I think it's clear that they're losing some ground in Syria and Iraq, but the fight between Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS has been going on for years, but these distinctions are without a difference for the homegrown terrorists. You know, they don't really care about the inner debates between the two foreign terrorist groups. What they really care about is the ideology, and they're joining ISIS because it's the biggest game in town.
Yeah, and Seamus, that is a great point, and also to Rena's point. I mean, we know that the killer at one point said that he was affiliated or somehow with a family member in al-Qaeda. Then he said, no, you know, actually I support Hamas, which is a Shia organization. And now we know that he called a 911 and said he was part of ISIS. And for those people who may not be all that familiar with these different terror groups, I think that the idea that ISIS is somehow on our shores and about to commit these acts of terror versus the ability for people like this, people who may have mental issues, to get their hands on weapons, for example, and then say that they're an ISIS sympathizer, there needs to be a distinction drawn between that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also need to put this in context. When I say there's 88 individuals who have been charged with ISIS-related activities, that pales in comparison to European countries. And it pales in comparison to a larger population size of American Muslims and then Americans writ large. So we put this in context. It's a very small number, but it is unprecedented for the U.S. context. Normally we have about 20 to 30 arrests. Last year alone we had 61. You're going to have a number of people who essentially latch on to what the interesting and counterculture event is of the day, and that's going to be ISIS.
Americans still so concerned. We have another CBS News poll that shows 51% of Americans are concerned about an attack in the U.S. by people who are already here, especially after San Bernardino, now Orlando. How real of a threat should Americans be concerned about these random lone wolves launching attacks on their own, inspired by what they're reading and seeing online?
Yeah, I think we need to put this in context of larger issues in terms of the U.S. And other threats that face us. But we should recognize that when we talk about homegrown terrorism, we truly mean homegrown terrorism. Of the individuals who were arrested, the vast, vast majority were U.S. citizens. They were born here, they were raised here, they grew up here. They just tried to latch on to Islamist ideology and try to be part of something bigger.
Seamus, Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, has called for a ban on Muslims entering the country. Is that a solution to this idea of fighting ISIS, this idea of homegrown terror, where we know the killer in Orlando was actually born in the United States? I mean, is that a way to prevent what a lot of people are afraid of right now?
Yeah, so the program on extremism, we look at data, right, and facts. And the facts show us that the vast majority are U.S. citizens. So a ban in terms of travel wouldn't necessarily get to the larger issues when you look at San Bernardino or Garland attack or the Orlando shooting. These are people that are born and raised here.
Even Fort Hood.
Even Fort Hood.
Major Hassan was a United States Army officer, and he carried out an act of terror on our shores.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
Seamus Hughes, Deputy Director of the Program on Extremism at George Washington University. Seamus, thank you for your explanation and your time.
Thank you.